A legal battle involving President Donald Trump and the BBC is moving forward, with the case now entering the evidence-gathering stage after a federal court scheduled a trial for early 2027. The lawsuit stems from a BBC documentary about the January 6, 2021, attack on the U.S. Capitol. President Trump alleges the broadcaster defamed him by editing portions of his speech in a way that he says created a misleading impression of his remarks. The BBC has acknowledged that its editing may have unintentionally compressed parts of the speech, but it denies committing defamation and says the documentary does not meet the legal standard required for such a claim. Rather than seeking an early settlement, the BBC is actively contesting the lawsuit and preparing its defense in court. As part of that defense, the broadcaster has requested access to a range of evidence through the discovery process. Court filings indicate the BBC is seeking records that could include President Trump's phone logs, scheduling information, and other documents related to his activities surrounding January 6th. The BBC argues that this information could help establish the broader context of the president's actions and public statements during that period. Discovery is a routine part of civil litigation and allows both sides to request evidence they believe is relevant to their claims or defenses. Whether the requested materials will ultimately be produced remains for the court to decide. The lawsuit also arrives as the U.S. Supreme Court recently declined to hear a separate defamation case that sought to challenge long-standing legal protections for the news media. That case involved attorney Alan Dershowitz, who argued that CNN had defamed him through its reporting during the first impeachment proceedings involving President Trump. Lower courts ruled against Dershowitz, and the Supreme Court declined to review the case, leaving existing defamation standards unchanged. Those standards largely stem from the landmark Supreme Court decision in New York Times versus Sullivan, which established that public officials generally must prove actual malice to prevail in defamation cases. Under that legal standard, a public official must show that a false statement was published, either knowing it was false or with reckless disregard for whether it was true. Legal experts have long described that as a deliberately high threshold, designed to protect freedom of the press while still allowing legitimate defamation claims to proceed in appropriate cases. Some Supreme Court justices, including Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch, have previously expressed interest in reconsidering aspects of that precedent. However, because the court declined to hear the recent case, the current legal framework remains in effect. That means President Trump's lawsuit against the BBC will proceed under the same established defamation standards that have governed similar cases for decades. Another issue expected to arise during the litigation concerns presidential immunity. Legal analysts note that because this is a civil lawsuit initiated by President Trump himself, the case follows standard civil procedures, including discovery. They also point to previous court rulings holding that presidents may, in certain circumstances, participate in civil litigation involving personal conduct that falls outside official presidential duties. For now, the focus shifts to pre-trial proceedings, where both sides will continue requesting documents, exchanging evidence, and presenting legal arguments before the case reaches a jury. The trial is currently scheduled for February 2027, although significant civil cases often experience scheduling changes before reaching trial. The outcome could provide another important test of U.S. defamation law, particularly as public officials and media organizations continue to clash over reporting involving matters of significant public interest. For the BBC, the case represents a decision to defend its reporting in court rather than pursue a settlement. For President Trump, it presents another high-profile legal dispute that could draw renewed attention to both January 6th and the legal standards governing defamation claims involving public figures. You're listening to our National Affairs Bulletin. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more national and international news throughout the day.